The Coalition Reclamation Authority had been settling the debts of extinction for 340 years. It did not conquer. It did not colonize. It arrived after the fact, when a war was finished and a species was gone or nearly gone, and it decided, with the calm, procedural certainty of an institution that had never once been overturned, who owned what remained. Its rulings were final. Its rulings were also, in 340 years, granted in favor of the destroyed party exactly twice. The authority did not advertise this number. It did not need to. Every delegate who walked into the assembly hall of second petitions already knew it. The way a gambler knows the house odds before sitting down, and sat down anyway. Station Ilirat Vec, where the authority kept its chambers, was older than most of the species who now served on its councils. It had been built by a civilization that no longer existed, in an era before anyone currently living had been born, and it had the particular gravity that very old, very functional things accumulate. The sense that it had watched a great many claims fail, and would go on watching a great many more, and would not be moved by the next one either. 214 years before the events of this account, the Thalari Assembly had ended a resource dispute with a species called humanity by removing the option of dispute entirely. The action was recorded in the authority's own archive under the heading Territorial Reallocation, SOL system. The language was administrative. The number underneath it was not 9.4 billion. That was the recorded population of Earth in the final planetary census taken before the strike, a number the Thalari Assembly's legal filing had rounded, in its official language, to negligible residual claim. The filing had been accepted. The seat had never been challenged. The matter had been closed for 2 centuries. Closed matters did not reopen at the authority. That was the point of the authority. A civilization could not simply return from destruction and ask for its seat back because a destroyed civilization, by every precedent the authority had ever set, did not return. It ended. Its assets were reallocated. Its name moved from the active registry to the historical one, and stayed there. There had been exactly 2 claims in the authority's history where a species presumed extinct had resurfaced to contest its reallocation. The first, 411 years ago and 30 years before the authority's current charter, had been dismissed for insufficient continuity of governance. The survivors, it was ruled, no longer constituted the same civilization that had been destroyed, and therefore held no claim to what had been theirs. The second, 160 years ago, had been dismissed for insufficient population. The survivors were real. The ruling noted with something almost like sympathy, but a colony of 11,000 did not meet the threshold to reconstitute a sovereign claim against an established territorial holder. 2 claims. 2 dismissals. That was the entire history of anyone asking the authority to reverse an extinction, and every delegate on the current council had that history memorized before they memorized their own committee assignments. So when the notice came through the authority's registry, filed properly, in the correct format, with the correct fees paid in a currency nobody at the authority had seen changed hands in over 2 centuries, that a representative of the species designated Homo sapiens, SOL system, presumed extinct, registry status, closed, wished to be heard regarding the reallocation of that system. The notice was read by 4 separate clerks before any of them agreed to forward it, on the theory that at least one of them must have misread it. None of them had misread it. The petition was scheduled. Scheduling a petition did not mean granting one. In 340 years, the authority had scheduled every petition it had ever received and dismissed almost all of them. There was no reason, procedurally speaking, to expect this one would be different. Procedurally speaking, almost nothing about it was going to go the way anyone expected. The clerk assigned to process the petitioner's credentials was named Son Ieth, a mid-tier administrator of the Veral who had processed several thousand delegate registrations over a 19-year career, and had, in that time, developed the specific tiredness of someone who believed he had seen every category of paperwork a sapient being could generate. He read the file once, in the ordinary the way he read all of them, scanning for the fields that mattered, population figures, chain of governance documentation, verification stamps from a recognized surveying body. He did not find what he was looking for, so he read it again, this time slowly from the top. The petitioner's name was Myra Voss. Her stated age was 41, calculated by a calendar Sohn had to look up, because it belonged to a species whose homeworld had not filed an active calendar registration with the authority in 214 years. Her place of origin was listed as Sol System, Earth, presumed destroyed, the same words that sat in the archive, unedited, because the form required her to state where she was from, and that, unedited, was where she was from. The section that made him read the file a third time was the survey data. Attached to the petition, stamped by a licensed independent survey authority 6 months prior, was a population and territorial assessment for 11 systems, none of which the authority had listed as inhabited, 3 of which the authority's own charts marked as uncharted, low priority. The assessment did not claim these systems had always been inhabited. It claimed they had been settled, gradually, over roughly a century and a half, by descendants of a small number of ships that had left Sol System in the hours before the strike and had not, according to any record the authority possessed, ever been detected again. The population figure attached to those 11 systems was 206 million. Sohn had processed extinction recovery claims before, small ones, tragic ones, the 11,000 survivors from 160 years back, colonies that had clung to a moon or an asteroid belt and never grown past a struggling few thousand. He had never processed one with a population figure that included the word million, let alone one that suggested it had gotten there without a single confirmed contact, trade record, or distress signal reaching coalition space in over 2 centuries. He forwarded the file with a note recommending priority verification, which was not something he had ever written on a form before, and which his supervisor read twice before agreeing to open a case. The independent verification took 4 months. It came back confirmed. Nobody at the authority announced this. It moved through the appropriate channels in the appropriate quiet the way things moved when an institution had not yet decided how it felt about what it had just learned. And by the time Ambassador Myra Voss's transport was cleared to dock at Station Ilirat Vec, the only outward sign that anything unusual was happening was that her berth had been assigned by someone 3 ranks higher than the officer who normally handled delegate logistics. Myra herself did none of the things a person might expect from someone about to make history. She did not request a formal reception. She did not issue a statement. She arrived on a modest transport with a crew of 6, disembarked with a single case of belongings, found her assigned quarters, and by all accounts spent her first several hours on the station doing what anyone might do after a long transit, reviewing the next day's schedule, checking the translation settings on her comm unit, and unpacking. Among the items she unpacked was a sealed glass vial, no larger than a finger, containing a small quantity of dark soil. She set it on the shelf beside her bunk, in the same unremarkable way a person might set down a set of keys, and did not mention it to the 2 station staff who came by to confirm her arrival. She had not mentioned it in the petition, either. It was not evidence. It was not a formal exhibit. It did not appear on any manifest because nothing required it to. The Assembly Hall of Second Petitions was built for exactly this kind of hearing, small enough that every delegate present could see every other delegate's face, large enough that a dismissal, when it came, could be delivered with the appropriate ceremony. 9 council seats occupied the raised tier. Below them, at the petitioner's table, Myra Voss sat with a translator unit she did not appear to need very often and a single data slate. She had not brought advisors. The authorities' staff had noted this, quietly, as either supreme confidence or a complete failure to understand what she was walking into. At the head of the council tier sat Chair Neil Ostrin, a varil of considerable seniority, who had presided over the authority's second petitions chamber for 31 years and had, in that time, developed a reputation for a very particular kind of silence. The kind that did not commit to anything in either direction until it was ready to. 2 seats down from the chair sat Councillor Vren Castho. Vren held the outer system seat, a position his family had occupied for 6 generations, a lineage of appointments that traced back, without interruption, to the Thalari Assembly official who had signed the original reallocation order for Sol System 2 centuries earlier. This fact was not secret. It was, if anything, a point of quiet institutional pride. The seat had passed cleanly, competently, through 6 holders, each of whom had managed the reallocated territory without incident, which was more than could be said for most reallocations the authority had ever ratified. Vren was, by every metric the authority used to measure such things, extremely good at his job. He was also, everyone in the room understood without anyone saying so, the delegate with the most to lose if this particular petition succeeded. Vren did not open the proceedings with hostility. Hostility would have been beneath the occasion and beneath him. He opened it the way certain councillors open a hearing they have already decided the outcome of, with warmth, with a small joke, with the relaxed confidence of a man clearing formalities before getting to the part where everyone goes home. "Ambassador," he said, and the word carried the particular weight that certain officials give a title they do not quite believe applies. "Before we begin the formal review, I find myself curious about something the survey documentation doesn't cover." Myra looked at him without any particular expression. Her eyes, several delegates would later note in private conversation without quite being able to explain why they'd noticed it, did not change based on what was happening in the room. They changed based on what she was thinking, and at that moment what she appeared to be thinking was simply, "He is about to ask a question." 206 million people, Vren said, spread across 11 systems, built up over 2 centuries with no shipyards this authority has ever detected, no trade routes we've ever logged, no distress calls we've ever received. He spread his hands, the gesture of a reasonable man raising a reasonable point. "Forgive me. I find myself wondering what precisely you're bringing to this table besides population figures. How many ships does humanity actually have, Ambassador? Enough to fill a shuttle bay." Several councillors smiled. It was not a cruel smile, not exactly. It was the particular category of smile that happens in a room where a hierarchy has just been quietly reaffirmed, where everyone present understands the shape of the joke even before it lands, because the shape of the joke is the shape of the world they already believe they live in. Vren was not being unkind. He was simply certain, the way a man who has never had his framework tested is certain, and certainty of that kind rarely announces itself as anything other than reasonable. Chair Neil Ostrin said nothing. He had said nothing, in fact, for the better part of 6 weeks. Not since the survey verification had crossed his desk, not since he had spent an evening reading a set of reconnaissance reports that had arrived through channels the authority did not normally use, and had understood, reading them, that whatever this hearing turned out to be, it was not going to be the formality everyone in the room currently believed it was. He had been waiting since then for the right moment to say what he had prepared to say, and this, Vren's small, confident joke, hanging in the room, waiting for an answer, was not yet that moment. So he waited, with the precise, practiced neutrality of a chair who has learned that the most useful thing he can do, sometimes, is nothing at all. The room settled into the kind of quiet that precedes an answer everyone already expects. "That's a fair question," Myra said, in the tone of someone who genuinely found it fair. "Do you want the number we're prepared to disclose in open session, or the total?" Vren's smile did not move yet. "The total, Ambassador." "Let's not do this by halves." 11,406, Myra said. "That's the first return fleet. It's not the total." The room did not react immediately. The way a struck bell does not sound immediately. The way there is a half-second where the air has been disturbed and nothing has caught up to it yet. That's the number of ships, she added into the silence, currently in service across the 11 reclaimed systems. Warships, colony transports, survey vessels, everything with a hull registration. If you're asking whether we can fill a shuttle bay, counselor, we filled considerably more than that some time ago. She did not smile when she said it. She did not look at Vren with any particular satisfaction, did not glance toward the gallery to see how the number had landed, did not do any of the things a person does when they know they have just detonated something in a room. She said it the way she had unpacked her case the day before, as a fact that existed, whether or not anyone in front of her was ready for it. The smiles stopped, not all at once. The way a wave stops, the ones closest first, then spreading outward, until the whole room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a number has just rearranged everyone's understanding of what they were looking at. Chair Nail Ostrin let the silence run for exactly as long as it needed to, and then spoke for the first time since the hearing had opened. Since the second week after the survey verification came back, he said, I've held a standing request with the authorities' reconnaissance division for independent confirmation of the ambassador's fleet figures. I wasn't going to bring it forward unless it became relevant. He paused. It has become relevant. He gestured, and the projection above the council tier resolved into the first of 5 files. Case 1. The image was a wide orbital shot of a shipyard, timestamped 11 months prior, taken by a coalition long-range survey drone that had drifted into the outer edge of a system the authorities' charts still listed as uncharted, low priority. It was not dramatic footage. The way an academy training simulation is dramatic, full of clean lines and deliberate framing. It was documentary footage, grainy at the edges, slightly overexposed near the shipyard's primary floodlights, the kind of image an automated system captures because it is programmed to capture anomalies, not because anyone composed it. The shipyard held 4 hulls under construction simultaneously. The drone's automated systems, reading the emission signatures, had classified 2 of them as heavy cruiser analogs and flagged the classification with a note. Tonnage estimate exceeds standard coalition heavy cruiser class by approximately 18%. Confidence. High. Vren was still smiling at this point, though the smile had narrowed slightly, the expression of a man recalculating something in the background while keeping his face composed in the foreground. Case 2. The next file was a resettlement record from a border outpost called Corvi Reach, a minor coalition trading post at the edge of surveyed space. 8 months prior, a human survey vessel, registration confirmed against the fleet manifest Myra's delegation had provided, had made contact with the outpost's civilian administrator. The recorded exchange was brief. The human captain had introduced her ship, stated her registry, and asked, with what the outpost's own transcript described as unexpected courtesy, whether the system's 3rd planet, uninhabited, unclaimed, listed in coalition records as available for allocation, was under any active petition. Told it was not, she had thanked the administrator, logged a formal settlement claim through the correct channel, and departed. The outpost had filed the exchange as a routine administrative note. Nobody at the outpost at the time had thought to ask what a border patrol from an extinct species was doing filling out paperwork. She followed procedure, Nail said, into the quiet. Every step of it. She had the authority to simply take the planet. She filed a claim instead. Case 3. The 3rd file was a transcript, not an image, a routine hail exchange between a coalition border patrol and an unidentified vessel, 6 months prior, in a system adjacent to the human-settled cluster. The patrol had requested identification. The response, translated and logged automatically by the patrol's own systems, had come back in flawless coalition trade language, formal, unhurried, and entirely unbothered. This is the survey vessel Amaranth, registered to the Sol Reclamation Authority, operating within our declared territory under Coalition Trade Protocol 17. We have no dispute with your patrol. Safe travels. Protocol 17, Nail noted, is the correct citation, word for word. Someone on that ship had studied our procedures in enough depth to invoke the right regulation, unprompted in a first contact scenario with a patrol that had no idea humanity still existed. He looked briefly at Vren. They have been watching us for some time, Counselor, considerably longer than we have been watching them. By this point, Vren was no longer smiling. He was watching the projection with the expression of someone doing a calculation that was clearly going to take longer than the remaining time in the hearing to finish. Case 4. The fourth file was not footage. It was a graph, a population curve, reconstructed from the survey data and cross-referenced against independent coalition demographic models, tracking the growth of the human settlements from an estimated founding population, 214 years prior, of just under 19,000 survivors distributed across a handful of escaping vessels. The curve did not rise smoothly. It showed two visible dips. One, Nail noted quietly, that aligned with what the survey data described as a catastrophic early famine during the first attempted settlement, roughly 40 years after the strike, and a second, smaller dip that the human delegation's own report attributed to an outbreak of a respiratory illness during the third generation, before their medical infrastructure had caught up to their population. Between the dips, the line climbed steadily, then sharply, then very sharply, the particular shape of a population that had stopped merely surviving and started, deliberately, planning to grow. 19,000, Nail said, to 206 million in 214 years, without a single shipyard, trade route, or settlement this authority detected until 6 months ago. He let that sit. That is not luck, counselors. That is not a population that recovered by accident. That is a population that made a decision, generations ago, about what it intended to become, and kept making that decision every year since. Case 5. The final file was the oldest. It was a signal log, retrieved, Nail explained, from the authority's own long-dormant monitoring array near the edge of what had once been Sol Systems' declared territory, an array so old and so low priority that nobody had reviewed its archive in decades. The array had been receiving a distress beacon for 189 years. It was faint, automated, degrading slightly with each transmission cycle, and it had never once been flagged for review, because the array's automated systems had correctly identified it as originating from a system with no listed active population, and had, by standing protocol, deprioritized it into the same silent queue as every other signal from a dead system. The beacon had stopped transmitting 4 months ago. The timestamp on its final transmission was 3 days after the human delegation's petition had been formally filed with the authority. They didn't stop broadcasting because the beacon failed, Nail said quietly. They stopped because someone finally went back for it. Nobody in the room spoke. The silence held the particular quality of a room that has just been shown, piece by piece, that everything it believed it understood about its own certainty was built on data nobody had bothered to check. Myra did not speak during any of it. She sat with her hands folded on the data slate she had not needed to use, watching the projection with the rest of the room, her expression unreadable in the specific way that suggested she was not watching anything she had not already known for a very long time. She had grown up with the story of the beacon. She had not needed the footage to believe it. She simply let the room catch up. Vren Castho stood, eventually, when the 5th file had finished and no one had moved to speak after it. He did not address the room. He gathered the single data slate he had brought with him, the way a man gathers something he no longer has any use for, and started for the door. He stopped there briefly, without turning around. The fleet figure and the settlement figure, he said, are going to need to be re-verified against the outer system's territorial charts. There are almost certainly boundary overlaps we haven't accounted for. A pause. I'll have my office begin that review this week. It was not an apology. It was not quite an admission. It was the sound of a man recalibrating a framework rather than defending one that had just failed, and the room understood the distinction well enough not to press him on it. He left without anyone stopping him, and the door closed behind him without any particular ceremony. Myra stood as well, gathering the single case she had brought into the hall, the data slate she had barely used, a translator unit she had needed even less than that. Chairnail Ostrin watched her do it, and when she reached the petitioner's table's edge, he spoke, quietly, in a register noticeably different from the one he'd used throughout the hearing. "You didn't bring an advisory team," he said. It was not quite a question. "I didn't need to argue anything today," Myra said. "I needed to answer a question honestly and let the room do the rest." Nail considered that. The reallocation review will take time. Formal proceedings, cross-filings, probably another hearing before the seat itself is revisited. "I know," Myra said. "We've had 214 years. We can wait for the paperwork." She left the hall the way she had entered it, without an escort, without a statement to the small cluster of authority staff still processing what they had just watched. Back in her quarters, she set her case down and picked up, from the shelf beside her bunk, the small sealed vial of dark soil she had carried from a transport, from a colony world, from a ship that had left Sol System 214 years before she was born, carried by someone who had never once stopped believing there would be a day worth carrying it toward. She turned it once in her hand, the way a person checks that something is still exactly where they left it, and put it back on the shelf. In the authority's administrative office, 3 doors down from the assembly hall of second petitions, Chairnail Ostrin opened the day's hearing log. The file that would,